Welcome, nutritionradio.org listeners. This is Lonnie Lowry, University Nutrition Professor of over 20 years and podcast host of long-running shows like Iron Radio. Come on in.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Nutrition Radio. So we're going to cover 4 topics each time, like we always do. And the month of November, we have Abbie Stack. So Abbie is a science undergraduate student. She's been on the podcast before, and I thought it would be good to check in with her on a weekly basis. You know from the introduction that I am Lonnie Lowry. I've been a professor for about 25 years, and now I consult for the food industry and for academia, trying to help those industries do what they do. So Abbie, maybe a sentence or two about yourself.
My name is Abbie. I major in biology and exercise science, and I love science.
Okay, well, you're in the right place. So let's just get right to it. In our food trend, we're going to talk about faux fish. Like, if it's not fish, what's in those fillets? In the second part, we're going to talk about nutrition science, breaking nutrition science and bridging the gap between basic nutrition knowledge and then clinical stuff, right? Patient care. Like, how much does your clinician know about nutrition? We were just talking about this on Iron Radio this morning, earlier, the other podcast, and how there's a lot of myths and misconceptions about nutrition, and sometimes it even seeps its way into the HCP world. In the weight management tip, we're going to talk about yerba mate and its potential role in being a GLP-1 agonist. So if you've been under a rock, GLP-1 agonists are all the rage for weight loss and diabetes and that kind of thing. So we'll touch on that. And then finally, we're going to do a recipe. Stick around to the end. Okay. So Abbie, you brought up the food trend of faux fish.
Market news, food and fitness trends.
And what's in those vegan fillets? How did that come to your attention and why the interest?
So I saw an article published in like a news article a couple days ago that Nestle was launching 3 new alternatives to whitefish in European countries. So it was part of their goal to increase sales of healthier foods by 2030. So that kind of spiked my interest, and I started looking into it, and it seems that they're going to be alternatives to, like I said, whitefish, fillets, nuggets, fish fingers, that type of thing. And they're supposed to be made with pea protein, and they would be like breaded on the outside sort of thing. I'm just a little bit curious as to whether the vegan community would be interested in purchasing this and how it's going to be much different from the already available vegan chicken nuggets, I guess.
I'm curious about why they think that fish isn't healthy. If they're trying to get away if they're trying to move toward healthier foods, I could see the plant-based thing from a environmentally conscious thing or an eco-friendly thing. That seems to be a big push with the plant proteins. Abbie, I think I'm not a huge fan of plant proteins unless you're hungry and you can eat more and more variety and that kind of stuff. I've seen tofu fake fish fillets, but I don't think I've ever seen pea protein. That's weird. I would think that would almost be straight pea protein can have a slightly sawdusty mouthfeel if it's done badly, I guess. Yeah, so apparently this is supposed to be healthier, is what they're pushing. Yeah,
and the thing that I was questioning is again, the vegan community, are they going to even want this? Because in my head, as someone, if I were vegan, I think if I wanted some sort of fish substitute, I would want a red fatty fish and almost have it have those like omega-3s that we know are in fatty fish to kind of serve as a substitute for those lacking from your diet. Whereas I kind of see like this white fish is just a different tasting vegan chicken nugget, especially if it's going to have breading all around it. I mean, I don't see that being too much of healthier than what is like the fish fingers, I guess you can buy frozen from the supermarket.
Right.
But when I did look into maybe some alternative salmon, it hasn't been released yet, but there's a company called Oshi that is planning to release the first whole cut plant-based salmon, and it's supposed to have equivalent levels of protein, B vitamins, omega-3s, and they're kind of marketing it as being or having less microplastics and mercury, which we find in seafood sometimes.
Right. Okay.
And it would be made from legume proteins and algae extract, and they would actually use 3D printing to create like the authentic fibrous texture of a salmon fillet.
All right. Yeah, I know in the past when we've covered cultured meats, that's been the challenge early on is how do you get this sort of collagen framework or how do you get the structure so it doesn't just feel like you're eating, like in this case, red jello, salty red jello, gross.
Gross.
Yeah. I guess that makes sense to try to avoid some of the mercury contamination and that kind of stuff. My concern would be that, like with the pea one, just pea. I think I'd rather just have animal protein, have the fish protein. Yeah. It's complete. Yeah. I've reviewed a couple of papers on pea protein, comparing it to whey. And in some ways it compares okay to whey. But in general, it's just not going to be quite as high on some of these protein quality scores and that kind of stuff. I'm sure, like, in the context of a full meal, I'm sure you probably get all the necessary indispensable amino acids and whatnot. Yeah. But that's a really good point, a consumer insight that you had. Like, but are people going to want it? And how is it different from chicken nuggets? That's a really good point. Right? Yeah. Is it fish flavor? There must be some kind of flavoring. What made Impossible Burger so big was they were using heme. People were like, oh, it's like bloody and it tastes like meat and, it's got that remarkably meaty thing. They must be using some kind of, I know there's like MFP, meat, fish, poultry factor. Who knows what they'd be adding, but there must be something that they're putting in there to make it fishy without being grossly fishy, right? Because that could go bad if they overdid it, I would think.
Yeah.
Are people even going to want it? The red meat thing, I bet what they're thinking is for years, red meat has been something that vegans have wanted to imitate, and I've heard omnivorous people say, if they're so against meat, how come they're always trying to make their food, press it down into the shapes of red meat or make it taste like red meat? It's kind of ironic.
It is.
And it depends if you're in it for the ethical reason. I would say, wait for the cultured meats to come along. I know they're probably focusing on red meats first, but eventually, I think they're doing chicken now and eventually fish. And if you're doing it for ethical reasons, that throws you a real curveball as a vegan. If your whole life you've been like, no, I'm completely against animal proteins, you're butchering living things. Hey, I'm with you. I can see the ethical angle. The cultured meats, though, you get actual meat without suffering. And so I'll be curious where that goes. But what were the brands again? Did you say that you noticed? Or were there...
So the Faux fish that's coming out with the 3 whitefish will be Nestle, but they're being launched in European countries first. And then the Oshi salmon fillet is a company out of, I believe, somewhere in the Middle East. That their plan is to start launching in the U.S. in 2024 in high-scale, like, New York restaurants is what they were talking about. Okay. And then the last observation I sort of made was it's called Good Catch, and that was like a tuna packet, kind of like rivaling like a Starkist packet. Oh. And that one, it was pretty similar. The amino acid profile is probably a little bit better because it had like a blend of soy, pea, chickpea, lentil, fava, navy bean sort of thing. But it had like really high sodium, so that was pretty questionable. I find that they do that a lot with vegan foods, I think, because sometimes they don't taste as great. So they increase the sodium a lot. But that's what I was looking at so far.
It's cool to look at the different marketing, like distribution channels. Like high-end restaurants is a far cry from a box of fake fish in Walmart in the freezer aisle. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. That's interesting thing. I hadn't really thought much about the faux fish. Like I said, I've heard of the poultry and the red meat stuff, a variety of things they're trying to do with that. All right, let's get to our second section then.
Breaking nutrition science.
So you're talking about bridging the gap between basic nutrition knowledge and patient care, and as far as like, the curriculum that clinicians get. Let's start with why the interest. Is this something that just came across your desk, or did you get in discussions about this? Why are you interested in bridging this gap?
Yeah, so I listen to a lot of podcasts of medical doctors who speak on their experience through their practice and how they had to sort of go out of their way to learn nutrition information, and it wasn't really taught to them in their curriculum. I think one of the doctors had said that in medical school, the only nutrition information they were given was an optional 2-week course, and it was actually given before medical school even started. So they a lot of them just didn't do it in the first place. So it's like very unfortunate. So I was looking, I was like, it has to be changing, because I think the relationship between food and chronic disease is definitely becoming more apparent, especially to doctors. So I was reading this article, and this one was based in the UK and how they were going to kind of format their doctors' nutritional curriculum. And they were suggesting that they kind of wanted to front load it into the undergraduate level prior to entrance into medical school. And I was kind of curious to hear some of your thoughts on that, because I could see that being like a good foundation, getting that underlying nutritional basis out of the way prior to they even start to learn anything about medical practice. But I also question, is it going to come back up? Because, repetition is really important to learning. And if they only learn it in their undergraduate career, I would fear that they might forget it by the time they're actually doctors.
That's a good point. Like, giving it to them before they understand physiology would be like talking about gasoline to a mechanic before she or he has ever studied an engine. Like, you got to know what you're putting in. And I think a lot of that depends on how it's delivered. Like a basic nutrition class that I've taught since, very early 2000s. Basically, here are the 6 classes of nutrients, carbs, fats, proteins, vitamins, minerals, water. That kind of thing could be good, at least so they have like categories in their mind, like for what each one of these things, like what rabbit hole of these 6 am I going down? Because we were just talking with Dr. Antonio, who, started the ISSN. He's got a series of papers on myths and misconceptions about key nutrients. And if you don't know where the nutrient fits in the map of the 6, right, like you're already at a disadvantage. Like obviously hydration's a big issue in medicine. So it's stuff like protein with physical recovery, whether it be from surgery or cachexia or sarcopenia or PIC. That's a really good question, Abbie. Now, you got a lot of nutrition, like freshman 101 out of the gate, because ex-phys covers a lot of nutrition and metabolism,
Yeah.
I would argue they might need to have an exercise physiology class, too. I would love to see a requirement. Like, you want to go pre-med? You better have a basic nutrition and a basic ex-phys, because the human body is meant to move, and in our current environment, we have certain, if they're not frank deficiencies, there's still inadequacies, and this, of course, omega-3s, vitamin D, you could pick. And also, we have a grotesque deficiency in physical activity. The human body's meant to move, and if we don't do that, things fall apart. I would love to see a requirement for that. And not just through a dietetics program, right? Because I got nutrition out of the gate a lot like you did, which is from a very sciencey perspective, a very physiology perspective, and not like a home economics type perspective. Not that that's bad, but to a lot of scientists, it's arguably a little softer approach. And so I'm not saying all dietitians would teach it that way. There's a lot of good scientists in dietetics these days, although they're still not going to take quite the same perspective as a terminally degreed physiologist. And again, we were just talking to Joey Antonio about some of that, because he and I have experience in both of those fields. But it's a good point. I would love to see them get a basic nutrition 101. At that point, taught by the nutrition and dietetics program or the ex-phys program or even the health program. Good. Yeah. And then something more advanced, maybe an advanced nutrition, or like a nutrition and pathophysiology. A lot of dietetics programs have that. I would think so long as they were open to letting the MD students in there, the pre-med students, and not say, oh, this is just for dietitians. You don't get to do this. This is our field. Hopefully that wouldn't happen. But I agree with you. We should get something basic at the undergrad level and then something more advanced once they understand the machinery of the human body and then, the fuels and the building blocks that are going in there.
I saw a few papers where they actually had a portion of the medical school curriculum being culinary cooking classes, and they actually were teaching them food preparation in relationship to health outcomes. It was more like a hands-on experience. And then I don't know exactly how they would be able to, I guess, evaluate whether the new doctors had, there was an effectiveness to the nutrition curriculum. And I kind of wanted to ask if there's any specific metrics or evaluation methods that can be employed to measure students' knowledge and skills and attitudes regarding nutrition?
Yes, there are standardized nutrition knowledge questionnaires, and you can sort of validate them by you give them to like freshmen, undergrads, and then you give them to senior undergrads, and obviously the scores should go up. Like there's lots of ways that you can validate these things. But yes, there are. In fact, when I teach sports nutrition, that's week 1. I say, what is nutrition evidence? How do you read evidence? Because we have a lot of healthcare practitioners that I think if they don't get enough research design and statistics training, like how do you have an evidence-based field if you're not really adept at reading evidence? Like what is quality evidence? So I usually start with that in sports nutrition. And as part of that, I've actually given a standardized nutrition questionnaire to the class. Like, let's see what you know, right? And then maybe we'll take it again at the end of the class kind of deal. And they've given that to cardiologists and dietitians and nurses and personal trainers. And then you can compare like who needs to know more, right? So these are validated and reproducible instruments, that can be used. But that's a great point. Like maybe we need to actually have that to make sure like some learning outcome, right? That they are in fact getting trained up. I think this is good, but I hope it's not futile. For decades, I have watched exercise physiologists and nutritionists, dietitians, and even physicians for what they're worth. Because back in the day, what they're worth as far as nutrition. Because back in the day, I was heard that 75% of med schools didn't require a single course in nutrition. Well, I don't know how that stat has held up, but that's kind of damning. But over the decades, the food industry marches on. We were talking about fake fish, and and there's all this stuff always coming down the pipeline. And I feel like we're swimming upstream. Like we have not been able to turn around this bus in the West of obesity. It's worse every year. It seems like no matter what we do, So I don't know. It's a real challenge. I like the idea of a culinary class because I think the kitchen is where the education meets the behavior change. Like recipes are the link between education and actual client outcomes, patient outcomes. But culinary is not the same thing as nutrition. I'm fascinated by food science, and I've had like one course, but I understand what happens after you swallow it. For some of us, we're nerdy enough to like it. But a culinary class, if it's more like a food science class, so people understand that some food processing is necessary. You hear a lot of HCPs say, oh, food processing is bad, bad, bad. Well, it can be bad. It can also be good, when they do things like fortify foods or enrich foods or whatever. It's a two-edged sword. But now, what about you, just for listeners, and I don't want you to share anything too private or anything, but you specifically sought training in exercise physiology and nutrition on your way to the graduate school and that kind of stuff.
Is that
or like what kind of classes might you recommend, that would get future physicians or HCPs better equipped, to deal with nutrition?
Okay. Yeah. I think XPhys, great. XPhys 1 and 2, great classes. I think that, in my personal opinion, I've taken anatomy, physiology 1 and 2, and then I took XPhys 1 and 2, and I really enjoyed how XPhys was able to incorporate more nutrition knowledge, whereas anatomy just kind of blows past it. You go through the whole digestive system, and then the food, what happens after that is not really talked about. So definitely could recommend taking XPhys, and then just any nutrition classes that your university offers. I'm not sure how other universities do it, but I know that typically like exercise science programs have their own sort of nutrition classes offered, as opposed to maybe like a health major department has nutrition offered. And I think they're both valuable. However, I think that the exercise scientists sometimes go a little bit more in depth in terms of the physiology and metabolic processes, and personally think that's more beneficial or more interesting to me, at least. So I would seek those out if you could, but not all universities are the same. They could offer health nutrition that's just as in depth as well. So I guess any nutrition course would really, really cut it at least for a baseline understanding, because I think you'll always learn, what your carbs, your fats, your vitamins, your minerals, all that sorts of stuff.
Yeah, even the basic chemistry, like what is a carbohydrate? What is a protein? Yeah. What is a fat? You get a lot of that stuff. Would you recommend chemistry classes? Do you think they're necessary, or maybe something that you just layer in later and let people make connections themselves between the intro nutrition and the chem?
I think that biochemistry could be super beneficial. Just understanding the structure of amino acids, like nitrogen group, all that sort of stuff. However, obviously, to get to that class, there's a few that come before it. You got to take your Gen Chems, you got to take your O Chems, you got to get all those ahead of it to be able to understand that. But I mean, I think biochemistry is like icing on the cake. It really ties everything together. The journey there is pretty difficult, but once you get there, it's like everything. It's like the precipice of your whole university experience. I think, at least, it just kind of ties everything together. But if you can take all your chemistries, I would recommend it. I mean, no knowledge is worthless, and sometimes people can get upset because maybe your potential energy curves aren't exactly what you're seeking, but you have to get over those small humps to get to the icing
funny.
on the cake.
Right. I taught in a university once, and they had a class their dietitians took, which was called Inorganic, Organic, and Biochemistry. And it was a service course offered by the chem department just for the dietitians. Now, there's two ways to look at that in my mind. One is you got to be very careful because you can have people coming out of a nutrition program, becoming healthcare professionals, and they think they know chemistry. But they don't know chemistry like you and I do with 4 years of it culminating in a biochem class. They did it all in a semester or two. But the flip side of that might be, then you don't have to wade through your sophomore, junior, and senior year before you can even get to the biochem course, because of all the prerequisites. We could just fast track some of the stuff while we get to the biochem, because I agree, that was the fun part for me. Inorganic 1 and 2 bored me to tears, and everybody had a lot of dread about OChem, and I know you liked it because you're a nerd, and that's good. But at the same time, it'd be nice if we could get to the biochem, because you're right, the biochem, it becomes the advanced reinforcer of that Nutrition 101 class, where you just learn that, protein and amino acids have nitrogen, and that's unique. Carbs and fats are just CHO, and, all that kind of stuff, and it would kind of reinforce. And hormones, fuel storage, all that kind of stuff. So the article was saying, what was your takeaway then, just as we recap?
They're recommending that nutrition knowledge for medical doctors be, I guess, focused all into your undergraduate years, and that would serve as pretty much all their nutrition knowledge moving forward. That was my sort of recap. They're sort of, I guess, pillars of understanding is they had dietary requirements, hydration, nutrition and health and promotion of illness prevention, one about malnutrition, nutrition screening, and then nutrition and hydration. Those were kind of like the 8 curriculum topics. I guess we never mentioned those, but those would be kind of focused into your undergrad. And then when you moved into your actual medical schooling, that's when you would just kind of, I guess, apply those. But that's like a model they're suggesting.
Yeah, it's good from their perspective, what physicians need. I'm glad that there's something in the literature, or there has been, but I mean, they're advancing this with new articles and what's necessary for a physician. Honestly, I've said it a long time. You might have heard me say this in the classroom. Everybody eats, right? So I think a basic nutrition course should be one of the gen ed, core courses that everybody has to take at university, because people who are college graduates are supposed to be better at self-care and nutrition. But how can you be if you don't take the course? Right? You don't just graduate and magically you're making better dietary choices. I think it should be a gen ed core, integrated core, whatever you want to call it, type of requirement. Coaches, even humanities students, everybody eats. Honestly, exercise science, not everybody exercises, at least not by the classic definition of the word exercise. Everybody moves, everybody has physical activity. But that wouldn't be a bad one either. But I've long fought at different universities. Some universities did it this way and they agreed, and some of them they just don't structure it that way. But I think it should be a basic requirement. That way, the physicians wouldn't have to worry about it. They would know, that the student had a basic nutrition 101 kind of course. Anyway, that's good. That's a good one. I'm glad that they're still wrestling with that topic and trying to make some progress on it. Because you can't just assume that the physician's assistant is deeply knowledgeable about nutrition. You just can't, especially in those kind of fast track programs. And then so oftentimes that's who you're seeing. You go to a quote unquote doctor's appointment and you see a PA or you see a nurse practitioner. And it's like, well, if you didn't go to school as long as the MD and at the same level, could you have even less? I don't know. Maybe those curriculums insist on more nutrition. I'd have to look into that. But yeah, that would be the risk. I mean, because everybody eats and it's such a huge impact on risk factors and even recovery. And, I really think that nutrition, the real benefit is the slow accumulation of the good stuff over years and years and years. And it's not just what you do 3 days, typical length of stay in hospital, right? During that period of time, it's so acute. I understand it's still important. You can't have people just, dehydrate and starve when they're in the hospital. And at the same time, you know what, Abbie, I don't know if I've ever told you this, but I think when I look at a lot of faculty, a lot of the ex-phys faculty, I know, not all, but most, they look pretty good when they get old. And I can't say the same thing for all the dietetics faculty that I've known.
Oh, no. Yeah.
It's a good argument for the power of exercise, I think.
Yes.
Very potent stimulus. And I know you know that. You were super fit even as a freshman, but, it matters. It matters.
Yeah. I think food quality can, push that needle, but I mean, it's not even there if you don't exercise, Yeah.
So, and it's why I think you need to have both, right? Exercise is stimulus to put it all to work. Without the initial stimulus, why would your body? Yeah. Anyway, good point. Okay, so we're keeping on track here time wise. Yep. Weight management tip. Now, you had been looking into some yerba mate tea and potential mechanism being GLP-1 agonist. I hadn't heard that. So what did you see there?
Weight management tips.
So I was reading an article about just boosting GLP-1 by natural products, and yerba mate tea had come up, as well as a few other different herbal-based sort of constituents. There is evidence to suggest in some mice research that it could increase GLP-1 hormone secretion. However, it's not clear, 100% elucidated, but interesting nonetheless. It has a potential effects on glucose metabolism and insulin sensitivity is what they kind of found.
Yeah, I think the whole insulin sensitivity thing, we were talking last week on the Iron Radio podcast about, there's a new paper just came out about a unifying theory of obesity. And one of the pre-existing theories of obesity was insulin sensitivity, right? If roughly one out of 3 Americans are pre-diabetic and insulin resistant, anything that's going to help with that could be good. That makes sense to me. In season 1 of Nutrition Radio, we did a little 10-minute blurb on foods and supplements that may affect GLP-1. I don't think yerba mate was one of them. Okay. But that's cool that they're looking at potential mechanisms. But like you said, this is rodent research at this time, right?
Yeah. Natural products boosting GLP-1. They concluded that the herbal-based constituents such as berberine tea, curcumin, cinnamon, wheat, soybean, resveratrol, and gardenia were known to exert an influence on GLP-1 release. That's
I have seen curcumin and resveratrol. Those might be some of the things that we did a little blurb on before.
Okay.
Yeah, but this goes back to what we were just saying about the benefit is the slow accumulation of good things over the decades, and if you're doing something like this instead of random cola, you might be better off, I suppose, because you're getting things that, whatever the mechanism might be, could help with appetite or body comp. I keep seeing more and more stuff. I know that you helped with the position paper, of course, and co-authored that on coffee. I keep seeing more and more stuff on coffee and fat loss and muscle gain. At the point of us doing our literature review, that was us just vaguely suggested, but I keep seeing more and more little suggestions. Enough so I'd love to see like a intervention study with pick something like a yerba mate tea, coffee, something like that, and then just track body comp over time or some kind of observational study or, Do people who consume yerba mate tea, do they have lower blood sugars or lower hemoglobin A1C? Do they have less body fat, or, not just whole body, but even regional body fat? That'd be very cool. Have you had this kind of tea before?
I have tried it. I was sort of influenced because I listened to a lot of the Huberman Lab podcast. And he had mentioned, Dr. Huberman, that he consumes yerba mate tea frequently. And I think Dr. Attia agreed. And I was like, well, they're doing it. Like, I might as well try it. So I thought it was similar to green tea, I guess. I'm not a big tea drinker myself, so I didn't have much to compare it to, but it was pretty good. I mean, it's very popular in, I believe, like South American, South America. Yeah. So I know they also had like little like kind of commercial products that they sold. I'm not sure if those had like a bunch of added stuff in them as well, but I thought that was interesting that they kind of sell at different gas stations and such.
Right. So you said when you looked, this does have, as part of its kind of plant phytochemical matrix, it does have caffeine in it, right?
Yes. Yeah, it does.
Yeah. I think over the decades, one of the common themes that I've seen is that stimulant nutrients, whatever, sometimes stimulant meds, they really kill your appetite. And so whether it's done through a GLP-1 mechanism or if it's just some kind of sympathetic nervous system response or whatever it might be, that might be the thing. Season 2 of Nutrition Radio, I had Chrissy Schumacher on, and she was she actually did a project where she put accelerometers on people's waists and wrists, and then we did diet records to look at if people who drank lots of stimulant beverages like coffee and tea, would they make you move more? And that was interesting. We actually didn't see increased movement, but part of the problem with that is doing that on a university campus that's so full of jocks like yours is, that coaches are mandating movement, right? So the idea of coffee and tea would be more just people who are individual fitness people that are going about their lives. Do they move more? Do they work out longer? Do they run around more? But then that would be self-driven, right? And if your coach is making you do lots, then that would kind of wash out the effect. And I think that's why we didn't see anything with that sort of type 2 error. I don't know. Yeah. Anyway. Okay. No, that's a good one to keep on the radar. I am interested in the different herbal teas. I'm totally a coffee person. You know this. And I think you are too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Too many good things to look away from with that. But at the same time, sometimes it'd be neat to get something that was a little lighter on the caffeine, but still could have other good things to offer. Okay.
Rant, product review, or recipes.
Our last topic is your recipe. So I'll let you introduce this. What do you have?
So this recipe, they're Sour Patch Kid grapes. I know they're kind of, I guess, more of a summer recipe, but my thought was, we just had Halloween, and so people's, Halloween candy might be laying around. You might want, some Sour Patch Kids, but these are a great alternative, and I love to make them. So you just take sort of green grapes, super easy, and, wash them, dry them, and then you put them in a bag, like a Ziploc bag, and you squirt, like, lime juice all over them, or lemon juice, one of the two. Okay. And then you take, like, sugar-free, like, Jell-O powder, usually, like, a sour flavor, maybe, like, lemon or something, and you pour the packet into the bag of grapes and shake it around, and the lime juice gets it to kind of, like, stick on the surface. Oh. And then I put them all on, like, a parchment paper sheet and put them in the freezer. And then I take them out, and they taste just like Sour Patch Kids.
No.
They're so good.
That is... Abbie, you don't know this about me, but I've always wished I liked grapes. I don't.
Oh no.
This might be a way for me to eat grapes, right?
Yeah, it's the texture. For me, the texture of grapes is weird because you got like that outside coating, and then like you bite into it, and it's like weird. But when it's frozen, it's just like it's almost like a Sour Patch Kid to me, at least.
Oh, I might try this because I mean, if you look at some of the very helpful, nutrients and phytochemicals in grapes. I just thought it's sort of like raw tomatoes. I can find ways to eat tomatoes. I haven't found many ways to consume grapes other than wine. I know that's not quite the same thing.
Okay.
It's good. And it's also easy, right?
Mm-hmm. It is easy.
A low barrier to entry for a recipe is really helpful. That's why I got so turned on to the thing about this overnight oats with the chia seeds and stuff.
Oh,
and
yes.
I've been doing that for a couple of months now. It's too easy. It's too easy. Like, I don't even have to boil oats in the morning. Like, for many years, my wife and I would have oats and berries, and I would dutifully go down first thing. I'd have to sip in my coffee. I'm boiling my pot of oats. And now I don't have to do that. I just do it all beforehand, like put it in the fridge the night before. And this is kind of like that. Like, you squirt on the lime juice. Do you like lemon or lime better? Which works better in your opinion?
I have done both. I have also mixed them. They don't really make a difference to me, but I think maybe the lime juice is more sour tasting. But yeah.
Yeah, I think I might err on the side of that. Does it have to be green grapes? Can you do purple? I would assume it just depends on what kind of Jell-O you shake in there.
Yeah, I've done raspberry, strawberry, the Jell-O, and then I've only done green grapes. I'm sure you could do the other ones. I think green ones maybe have more of like a sour taste profile, so maybe that's why they kind of chose that. But I've always been interested. They're kind of expensive, but like the cotton candy grapes. Have you ever tried those before from the store?
Once a long time ago. People were like, no, you got to try this, Lonnie. If you wish you ate grapes and you don't, you got to try these.
Yeah.
They got me halfway there. They were interesting.
Okay.
They were interesting. Yeah.
They are. So I would definitely try it with those. Those would probably make it super sweet, but I don't know. I've never tried it. So.
Oh, no, that's good. I'm going to have to give it a go.
Okay, cool.
Next time I go to the grocery store. Right. Yeah. And then, you can't just put them in a freezer bag and toss it in the fridge because they'll stick to each other. That's why you do the cooking sheet, right?
Yeah. But once they are like done, I just kind of usually pour them into like a little container and then put them back in the freezer. So then they're like easy to grab from.
Yes, exactly. I mean, that's how I do. If I get fresh berries, I'll buy frozen berries too, but I do that with berries. I'll dump them out. Yeah, fresh berries, freeze them on a cooking sheet, and then dump them in a bag. Once they're frozen, of course, they're like marbles and they don't stick together, right?
Yeah.
I imagine it's the same thing. Although these will have a stickier coating because of the Jell-O.
Yeah.
Yeah. But once you put them in a bag, they're frozen hard. They won't stick to each other then too much, maybe a little.
No, they won't, because like they kind of get almost like a dry like coating on the outside, but they do thaw fast. So if you pull them out of the freezer, usually I only pull out the ones I'm going to eat and then leave them in there because they will thaw pretty fast.
I think it's fine because they have like almost like when you eat frozen mango. You ever eaten frozen mango from the freezer?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like how it's almost like soft already. It's similar to that, I think. So
we've got the food trends, the breaking nutrition science, the weight management tip with the yerba mate tea, and then Sour Patch Kid grapes.
Yes.
It's good stuff.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us today, Abbie. We'll check in with you again next week and throughout the month of November. And we'll keep diving into cool stuff.
Awesome.
All right. Everybody, we'll see you then.
The NutritionRadio.org podcast is for informational purposes only. If you're interested in starting a diet or exercise program, check with your physician, nutritionist, or qualified exercise physiologist in order to make the progress that you need.